All right. Welcome, everybody, to today's CEO Stakeholder webinar with Mark Stone, CEO and President of the FSH Society. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Without further ado, let me see if I can share my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining. I've often said the most important thing somebody can give me is your time, and so I want to value the time you've taken today, whether it's just afternoon if you're on the Eastern time zone, or it's sometime in the morning if you're somewhere else pretty much in the world. I want to talk to you about how we're partnering to accelerate drug development in order to fulfill our commitment to you, our families, to deliver disease-modifying therapies by 2025. And through this, I want you to consider that because you're here by invitation, you are strong partners in this. Couldn't do it without you. As a matter of fact, it's because of you, because of your engagement, because of your involvement, because of your pledging and your giving over the years, that we've been able to do what we've done, and that we are able to make commitments going forward into the future. I want to give a little bit of an organizational recap. The last time that we had this time together was the end of October, and quite a bit has happened. We have tried to keep you up to date in all of that, but let me first, we live in this every day. A lot of times, it becomes pretty routine and second nature to us, but I just want to give a brief organizational recap, and then I'm going to give a little bit longer, almost a report, a shareholder report, if you will, where are we and what have we done since October till now, and then I want to look ahead at what we're going to be doing in the next, not just 2 to 3 years, but even a shorter time frame in this next year. So that's kind of how this is laid out. Anyway, our organizational recap. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this because we know this. We've gone over this several times, and so the 4 pillars in our strategies: to accelerate research, to expedite treatments and a cure, to enlarge, engage, and empower an active global community. We seek to leverage and expand our resources to support the mission and to ensure organizational capacity to accomplish the mission. These things we're on a daily basis, those are what drives and centers our decisions we make, the programs we roll out, the initiatives we fund and we're involved in order to move these things forward. Really, you can boil this down to 2 program areas, strong program areas, in order to accelerate research to treatments and a cure, and that's the first one and the second one. You need a concerted effort by the research development community in order to do that, and you need a concerted, growing, and active patient community in order to do that. And that kind of sums up those 2, and we'll sum up the rest of our talk in those 2 spaces and areas. Of course, you need resources. One of our donors reminded me this weekend, you need resources to move the thing forward. And we want to make sure that we have the organizational capacity to do what we say we can do, to do what we say we're going to do. What this means in practice: in accelerating research, I want to break it down and really focus us on 2 things. One, we are implementing what we've called a therapy accelerator. And those are initiatives that are uniquely designed in what would be called the pre-competitive or the preclinical area that allows pharmaceuticals to move confidently into clinical trials and into the regulatory path and pathway and environment. And research-focused patient advocacy groups can play a big role in that. And the second one is to create an industry collaborative or an industry consortium to help us move things forward, a funding and program consortium, so that we can, with laser-like focus, begin to pinpoint the obstacles and begin to eliminate those obstacles one by one. Engaging a global community, how do we do that? What's that infrastructure we've rolled out? A national and global chapter initiative. is really how you can do that most efficiently and most effectively, especially with the great quality of leaders that we've had signed up and are leading our efforts so that we can have a local presence and global impact. And that's really what we're after. And of course, raising and leveraging resources. I'll touch on just a moment the leadership and major donor campaign paired with the industry consortium I talked about in the accelerating research part in order to really move these things forward and turbocharge things, because we're faced with some larger and larger initiatives and projects that will really help expedite the therapy development. And organizational capacity, acquiring expertise to lead the Therapeutic Accelerator, as well as continuing to bolster our support of our volunteer-led chapter directors, fundraisers, etc., through good staff support. Anyway, the current situation, I want to give a current situation and kind of an activities report, as I mentioned, from last October and all that we've done. I'm going to start first by looking at that first initiative to serve as a therapeutics accelerator or to accelerate research toward treatments and a cure. Here are our existing industry programs. When you put them all on one slide like this, it's pleasantly overwhelming. To be in a rare disease and yet to have a pipeline that is this prolific is pretty amazing. On the far left of your screen, the existing programs, you'll see Acceleron, and at the bottom you'll see Stricogen. Both of those are muscle regeneration, muscle building, strength building programs. And the four in the middle are working on and are focused on therapies that will either reduce or eliminate DUX4 or the toxic impact of DUX4. We've been working with some other programs to get them more involved. In the business, it's called, is this disease tractable? Can we find therapies? Can we find treatments? Can we find a cure? And the overwhelming evidence is yes. And yet we know and we understand that our obligation as a research-focused patient advocacy group is that we go and we make presentations in these companies that are considering getting involved. They've got a unique compound. Some of them are very much into gene therapies. I believe one or two might even be into a CRISPR kind of modality, so that might be a little bit longer range, but they're all focused on our disease or considering getting in therapy development for our disease. I believe there's 14 here on the screen, which is really, really amazing in a rare disease state. So we can be very hopeful with that. At the same time, we've got this bridge, and many of you have seen this bridge illustration. I believe I showed it last October. We do have all of those promising treatments in the van. By the way, my personal opinion, and you can take that for what it's worth, is there are therapies in development now that I believe will work. We just have to get them to the other side. But what's needed to fill in this bridge in a typical drug development fashion, and that's what I talk about when I talk about the pre-competitive or the preclinical space, it's this big span that we really need to fill in. In order to fill it in, or in order to have a clear path, if you will, a typical therapy or treatment needs a well-characterized and homogeneous patient population. On the surface, we are not. You need a predictable readout. So if A plus B equals C, you always want that C. Sometimes in the way this manifests itself, it's not very predictable. You need a correlation of the readout with a relevant outcome measure. So if I give you a therapy, it will stop this progression, or it will enhance this, or it will cause this to happen. That's not readily apparent either. And you need to show positive effect in a short amount of time, in a short time frame. And that's usually, pharmaceuticals love 3 months, 6 months, 9 months is a long trial for them. We all know that the effects of FSHD in some of us take some years to really show up in a functional way. So that's why the bridge is out. That's why we have to do the work. And as we've talked about in the past, the work it really revolves around these 4 areas. And while I've illustrated it this way, what became readily apparent in the industry collaborative meeting that we had with the FDA and our industry partners, which I have in a slide later on, is that you can't take any of these individually. They almost have to all be done collectively in concert with one another, sometimes using our clinical trial research network as an asset to do 2 or 3 of these functions, sometimes going to another research organization to accomplish something, sometimes going to these assets that have already been built out in the field. Like we have several patient registries all over the globe. Some of them, though, are not powered well. Some of them are not the same protocol, some of that kind of thing. So it's taking all of these assets, working with them all at once to build this bridge all at once. And so that's really the challenge that we have. But we have identified the building materials that it's going to take to finish the bridge and get across. That's the good news. And we believe that we can serve as the general contractor. Some of my colleagues build this. I don't know quite how to do this, but I think the guy's cute. To use this slide, last October I showed you how we were going to progress. And obviously this started in Q1 of 2019. But you see the recruit CSO with drug development experience, we tagged that for Q3 of 18. We've completed it, but we've completed it 2 quarters late. Hosting the industry collaborative, we really wanted that to happen in Q4 of 18, but it did happen in Q1 of 19. So again, this is in total transparency, but it lets you know that we're moving forward. The nice thing about it is, because the foresight of our board, of our leadership, and of you, our supporters and donors, we funded in 2016 the launch and the start of this clinical trial research network. And as maybe I can go backwards. Yes, as you see in the phase 2, they are actually already working on validating image markers, trial outcomes, and regulatory guidance. So we've got a head start on that. So while some things we're trying to run to catch up, other things we've actually got a head start on. And so we're very encouraged that we're running on the mark and that we're using all of the assets globally that we can use to move forward faster in a faster way. And we're still holding our feet to the fire that we're going to accomplish the majority, if not all of this work by the end of 2021. As I mentioned, one of the things back here, besides getting a CSO, which we have Dr. Jamshed Arjaman, he's actually based out of San Diego, but he's here in Boston today because we're going to, beginning tomorrow, going to be getting in front of all of our pharmaceutical partners again to keep that moving forward. But he's been he's a find. He's been a godsend, if you will. He's quickly ramping up and beginning to formulate and refine this process that you see here, and really begin to focus our efforts on what's our low-hanging fruit, what do we need to do this here and there, and then next time and next time in order to accomplish our goal. Right under that, you see host the industry collaborative on drug development, and we've done that. We did that as of March 12th. This was in front of the FDA. We had 6 FDA scientists and regulators. We had the main regulators from CDER, which is the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, and we had the main officer that handles the muscular dystrophy space. So we had the right person in the room. and C. Burr, which handles the biomarkers. And if you remember, that was one of our 4 pieces or components that we had. And then we had others that were in there, 5 NIH officers. We had 10 academic thought leaders in the room, clinician researchers by and large. And we had 17 representatives from 8 biopharmaceutical companies. We invited all of the patient advocacy. We invited all of the FSHD funding organizations, Friends of FSHD, FSH Research. We invited the Chris Carino Foundation, et cetera. MDA was there. And so we were delighted to have the community with incredible synergy gathered together. And a little shout out and kudos to Dr. John Porter, who we contracted in the fall to lead this effort. He was amazing. He's just written the white paper summary on this that we are now reviewing, in the process of reviewing. I mean, we just received it on Friday. So we're in the process of reviewing, and we'll be releasing that too, with recommendations on how to go forward and how to move forward. And as you see on the slide, the event was underwritten by a generous grant from one of our donors. We can't do this without you and your efforts. Mentioned the Clinical Trial Research Network. We're looking to expand it, and we're working with them on the leaders of the principal investigators on a memorandum of understanding that would get us at a seat of, in a seat at the executive table, so that we can target where our expansions are. We want to expand where we have active patient communities, because that's a nice synergy for clinical trials that are coming. We also know that because clinical trials are coming, we need to expand not only this network, but we need to expand our patient base as well. All of this shows over this past 3 to 5 months since I've talked to you last like this, that we have an incredible ability and power, muscle and might, if you will, to get all the stakeholders that we need at the table, around the table, putting in their pieces of the puzzle to make these things happen. The FSH Society, leading the way, has been able to get industry and pharmaceutical companies engaged and involved, and eventually becoming a program and funding collaborative as we move forward. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We've been able to catalyze early clinical development. We've been able to enhance clinical trial recruitment, and we are building a patient engaged engagement strategy globally. Again, engaging with pharmaceuticals, engaging with academia, the regulatory environment. Clinical Trial Research Network has become and is becoming more an important, what would be called a core facility or a core infrastructure to do a lot of our quote unquote bridge work, filling in those gaps and filling in those bridges, because, and we've funded that, we, meaning the viewers, the people that are participating in this webinar, through the society, we funded the launch of that, as I mentioned, in 2016. With about $120,000. We've given them about another $130,000 or $40,000 in bridge funding, which has brought on the MDA has now given them an infrastructure grant. The government, NIH, has given them a UO1 grant that allows them to reach out to almost 200 families and take them through some of that clinical trial protocol development and clinical trial endpoint development that's so vital and necessary. And I don't want to forget our funding partners, because Friends of FSHD Research, FSHD Canada, FSHD Global in Australia and out of Australia, as well as the Chris Carino Foundation. All of those are helping fund a collaborative and consortium, if you will, of funders. For instance, and I could go around and name different things that each of these have funded. of our collective efforts. But Friends of FSHD Research, in connection with the Clinical Trial Research Network, actually funded the international expansion to 3 more sites over there, or a few sites over there. So we couldn't do it without them. I was so glad that they were around the table at the most recent drug collaborative meeting. I want to shift a little bit, because I said that 2 things are required to expedite treatments and cures. One is a concerted collaborative effort seeking to accelerate research. And there you engage primarily pharmaceuticals and academia. You get some funding partners around you. You build a clinical infrastructure, or a clinical trial infrastructure, research infrastructure that moves toward the clinic. But none of that can happen without enlarging and engaging an active patient community, educated and empowered and volunteering for trials and studies. So our goal, our strong goal and our strong effort and our strong emphasis is to provide engagement, connectivity, and cultivation of a trial-ready community. We need to reduce some barriers for our families to get involved in studies. We need to reduce some barriers for our families to get involved in trials. I believe that we need to begin to use the 3,400 patients that are now self-identified in our database, what we call our contact registry, to begin to create surveys that let pharmaceutical companies and let the FDA know what's important to you. What is important to you? And I believe that we can do that, and we can power that very, very well as grow that patient base over the next year or 2. As an infrastructure, as I mentioned, we launched a chapter, our chapter initiative, where we want to have a local presence while having an enlarged global impact. We did this as an infrastructure to engage more people and engage families and engage patients. The purpose is kind of 4-fold. We want to make sure that we've helped and we've done all that we can do to help our families be their own best advocate through education and empowerment. We just got back, this says Bay Area chapter. Interestingly, we launched our chapter program, our chapter initiative last June at our Patient Connect meeting. And we were hoping to have maybe 7 or 10 chapters by now. I can't even keep a map up to date. And you'll see in a little bit, there is 2 or 3 left off of the map I'm getting ready to show you, just as an illustration purpose. But we currently have 23 chapters led by great volunteer leaders. And we want to come alongside them and help them be their own best person and help them represent the society in their local area. There is a powerful force moving literally across the land, and it's our chapter initiative led by really great chapter leaders. Anyway, patient and family empowerment. We want to build community and connectivity. I don't want anybody to travel this journey alone. If I've heard it once, I've heard it way too many times. And when people attend one of our events, be it an educational event or a walk or something to that effect, they say, I have never met anyone else that's had what I have and that understands what I'm going through until now. I want that story to end, and our chapter initiative helps us do that. Increase fundraising capacity. This literally fuels the research accelerator engine to go faster. It just does. You could call it as a byproduct, but I would rank it right up there even with raising funds. It's an empowerment tool too. When you step outside yourself and you go, you know, I can't do anything about my progression, but by dag, I'm not going to take this lane down. I'm going to do what I can do. It is empowering, and just psychologically, emotionally, it feels like you've got some control over a disease that has left you otherwise powerless. And that just from a feeling, from a psychological standpoint, is worth gold to me. And then awareness and advocacy, speaking one message with one voice. If we take all the globe, almost 1 million strong. That is a powerful, powerful message and a powerful voice that will be heard, will not be silenced. And again, our goal when we started and launched this was to have 30 volunteer-led, staff-resourced national chapters connecting with more families, advocating for therapy development, getting involved in therapy development, and raising funds to accelerate therapeutic development for all of us. And I think that we are well on our way to hit that goal. By the way, that was like a 3-year goal. I think we're going to have to raise it. Here is a quick map of what we have now, minus a couple, 2 or 3. I added 1 or 2, but I can't keep track. Every time I talk to Beth Johnston, which is our Chief Community Development Officer in charge of our chapters and volunteer programs, she says, I got another one. You know, okay, I need this to be an interactive map or something, I guess. So let me explain real quick where the community intersects with our research. We can have an activated community doing chapters, walk and roll, family days, marketing, communication, social media, raising general awareness in a local area, getting together, traveling the journey. We can have our researchers over here and our pharmaceutical partners rolling out clinical trials, looking for clinical outcomes, imaging, biomarkers, natural history, etc. But it's this real critical middle piece that if it's missing, things will not happen. Everything will grind to a halt. And this is exclusively the area for our families, for our patients. Getting involved in a registry, focus groups, surveys like I talked about, and enrolling in studies, enrolling in clinical trials, being a part, being willing to sign up. And I know many of you are. And I've heard from some of you that you're frustrated that you don't meet this protocol or that protocol or the other protocol, but don't give up. Don't give up hope. Because we're going to, you know, there's going to be a lot of studies out there. They're going to broaden the protocol sometimes. Sometimes they're going to narrow and tighten it. But all of it will go to expedite that treatments and cures. So thank you for signing up. Thank you for showing up. And thank you for being a part of this, because it is an absolutely critical thing. If you take it away, there's no bridge. Nothing happens. But when you bring it back together, bam, it happens. And we're doubling down our efforts on making this middle part more of a part of what we're doing going forward as far as this accelerating research toward treatments and cures and how patients and families can be involved. The next steps, I want to quickly enumerate some areas of focus. Jamshed has been on staff now for about 2 months. We have done a whirlwind tour of a lot, if not all, of our clinical trial research network sites, our current sites, at least over here. He has talked to some of the great thinkers, leaders of our in our research area, and I could begin to name them, and many of those names would be extremely familiar to you, both clinicians and researchers. He took part in the FDA meeting. He was on staff when we rolled that out. And he's done deep dives in research and in reading and in understanding the modality here. He was also coming directly from Genea Biocells, and Genea was working in our space with a promising compound. So he already understands and knows a lot of our about FSHD and our space and that. But these are beginning to be refined from that timeline that I showed you. So some areas of focus going forward. We recognize and realize, we've heard from our pharmaceutical partners and we've heard from you, our families, to have accessible and inexpensive diagnostics. Right now, to get diagnosed with this disease, if you're going to pay out of pocket, it would be somewhere plus or minus $2,000. We need to get that down. We need to get that down certainly under $1,000, and even less if we can. We believe we can. We might even create a global center that could happen. It has to be accessible, though. You say, well, I can't go to that center. Yes, but if we could send you to Lab 1 in your neighborhood, and perhaps then they send in that, or something like that. But we're beginning to unpackage that. We're beginning to see what we can do there. We were beginning to see, do we need to create a global core facility Do we need to just enhance more people's ability, more institutions' ability to do a good diagnostic in a rapid and quick way? But our pharmaceutical partners need it. Our families need it. We understand that that's one of the linchpins in getting us further faster. An analysis of global registries for natural history. As I mentioned, we've got strong registries in Italy and France and in the Netherlands. We've got a national registry here that's based in Rochester, New York at University of Rochester. And one thought is that we take a very basic set of values and we roll up de-identified data into a global registry, and then we analyze it. And perhaps out of all those thousands of people and tens of thousands maybe of years that those patients have been tracked, you can find some corollaries to identify some standards of disease progression. Remember, going back to that bridge, and what we really need is something that is pretty standard, pretty routine, and that's where you find it in this natural history. The other thing that we can do that might be quicker and would certainly be less expensive is that we get data scientists to go into each individual registry. Of course, we pay for that. We get access to it, and they're analyzed on their own merit. And then we combine that analysis into something that might be global and certainly powered well. We're looking at various options and ways, just like the diagnostic, but this is becoming a clearer and clearer focus that we really need to take this the next step and the next step and the next step forward, because our field needs it and we need it for expedited research and expedited therapy development. Biomarker validation, discovery and validation of DUX4 measurements. Right now, you measure DUX4 by taking a piece of muscle out. Painful, not extremely replicable on an oftentimes basis. You can't do it every month. You can't do it every 3 months, really, or at least most families I talk to don't want that to happen. So can we find a blood biomarker that either has DUX4 or some downstream DUX4 effects so that we can tell, okay, there's DUX4 in the system? You're thinking, well, Mark, that's what a diagnostic does. That's how we're diagnosed with FSHD. Yes, but what if we give you a therapy that stops DUX4? And what if we, in partnering with the FDA, get them to embrace as an endpoint the stopping of DUX4? Then we just need to be able to quickly and easily validate that that has happened, perhaps through a blood biomarker. And so that's as much as I can unpack, and a lot of that I'm just parroting from something else I've heard. So it's a challenge, it's a hurdle to overcome, an obstacle to overcome, but it's not undoable. In other words, we believe that we can do that. We believe that we need to expand and create a stronger bond and a stronger partnership with the Clinical Trial Research Network, the CTRN. I've already talked a little bit about this earlier, so I won't belabor that point. But clinical endpoint validation, MRI, biomarker validation, existing FSHD network for conducting clinical trials. We're also working with them on patient acquisition and activation. And we believe that the follow-up with FDA is to host a patient-focused drug development meeting. And that has incredible power to put your voice behind what's important to you in drug development and in drug discovery. For instance, if you knew that a pill was safe and that it stopped DUX4, even though it remains yet to be proven that it stops the progression of the disease, would you want to take it? If you say absolutely yes, because all of the best research says if you stop DUX4, you stop progression, the FDA needs to hear that, because that matters to them. And we, again, as that honest broker, can host these kinds of meetings where the FDA listens and the FDA asks questions and the FDA takes your voice into consideration. And so we know that we need to do that, as well as grow a stronger patient base. Again, how do we resource? Resourcing to accomplish the goal, fueling the engine. We believe that we're going to need a large sum of money in a short amount of time in order to make multi-year commitments. It has been our standard operating procedure, which it creates a strong, solid financial base to not spend the money before we raise it. And we want to try to continue to do that, at least before we raise the commitments to it. And so some of these things, if we were to enlarge an MRI study, which is quite expensive, that might be $1 million. If we are to expand over 2 or 3 years, if we were to expand the clinical trial research network, that might be $900,000 over 3 years. Before we step in and make commitments like that, we need to make sure we have either the cash or commitments from our major donors and our leadership donors, those that have been invited to this talk. So we're launching a futures campaign. As a matter of fact, this is the brochure. Some of you have received it, some of you haven't yet, but it's primarily asking our donors who have been faithful in the past, have given every year faithfully, to say, listen, I don't want to just give every year. I want to see how much I can give, and I want to make a commitment for 3 years so that you can make commitments in moving this thing further faster. And so we need to make multi-year, multi-million-dollar commitments to accomplish the goal of validating the clinical and regulatory pathways. Consequently, we need 3-year pledges. We believe we need to raise $10 million over the next 3 years. That's $3.3 million a year. From the donor group that we're focused on, we raise about $2.2 million a year to give you some kind of corollary. So we really need to ramp that up by about 50%, either from existing donors or new donors. I don't care where it comes from. It can come from one big gift as far as I'm concerned. But we need to hit this target, and those are some of the numbers as we all work together in order to hit the target. Again, sources, leadership, and major donor groups. There's approximately 300 of our donors that fall into that category. Our current giving level is 2.2. And the funding focus will be investigator-initiated and society-sponsored research, patient acquisition, and the research infrastructure that I've been talking about. Not only that, though, I've been talking about this program and funding consortium, this collaborative that pharmaceuticals, investing in pre-competitive regulatory and clinical validation to enhance therapeutic development and approval. We're going to now ask pharmaceuticals to sign up a memorandum of understanding and join a consortium, primarily asking for $250,000 a year over the next 3 years per pharmaceutical partner. And we've indicated that our donors, that our society will match their gift dollar for dollar. So if they give us $5 million, we'll match it with another $5 million. So that we'll have $10 million in our war chest. So that's another reason why we're going out and we're rolling out a 3-year commitment going forward. Here's a little bit of how we're going to spend it. We have some material that we'll be sending you later on in the year. That this is a little blurry because I've really expanded and blown this up, I think from a PDF. But about 80% is in research. We believe that the patient engagement and recruitment portion of this will be about 15%. And then infrastructure, we'll have attorney's fees, and we've got financial administration of this and some of that kind of stuff. I want to provide a real quick summary of all that I've said. We're coming into the Q&A time, and I'd hope to leave about 15 minutes for that. So I might actually hit my mark depending on how quickly I get through this summary. We have several promising therapies. Remember that, 14 that are in a pipeline, and they're ready to start clinical trials, some of which I believe, in my opinion, will work to stop progression. Trials are being delayed due to the uniqueness of the disease. In other words, we have no way really well to measure really well the positive effect of a therapy in a clinical trial setting. And what I mean by delays is there's one pharmaceutical that was in that first list that have compounds that have actually shelved a very promising DUX4 reduction, just waiting until the field catches up with the ability to measure in a clinical trial. That's actually happened. And so we know that we've got to run hard, far, and fast, or more of those kinds of things will happen. Delays could last a decade or longer if we don't act. That's based on my history, my experience, plus what I've studied from other types of genetic diseases like ours. We are in a position to bring all stakeholders together globally to both broker agreed upon solutions, as well as serve as a general contractor to do the bridge building work, eliminating the obstacles, and moving things toward regulatory acceptance, opening that pipeline of regulatory acceptance. We recognize that we're guessing, educated guess, we need to triple the number of patients in our database. We already have the world's largest database contact registry of patients at 3,400. We probably need between 8,000 and 10,000 because of all the trials that are in the pipeline that are coming, and you can only be in one interventional trial, not the other one, and some of those kinds of things. Not everybody will fit the protocol, and so you cast out your message like this. You might get this many people responding. You might get this many people that go to a clinic and get tried, and you might get this many people that actually fit the protocol. And so to get all the protocols of all the trials that we believe are coming in the next 3 years filled, we need this many patients. We need 8,000 to 10,000. And so we're maximizing our efforts in recruitment and engagement, activation and acquisition and activation of those. And we believe that the estimated time and cost to complete the work, eliminate the obstacles, open the regulatory pipeline is 3 years, although I think some of my research and scientific colleagues might think that's a bit optimistic. We're still pushing that way. I believe it'll take an investment of between $10 and $15 million, and broken down in pharmaceutical investment as well as society investment through our major donors. It's a big mountain. Let me tell you, it's a huge mountain. If you don't know, this is a picture of Everest. Interestingly, I don't have one on my wall, but when I laid this out a year and a half ago for our executive committee, I looked up at all the things I knew we still needed to do. And I looked at them and I said, just to be honest with you, this makes me really tired, because I know the trek, I know the climb, I know the dangers, I know the pitfalls, I know things that could stop us cold exist in this landscape. But then I looked at one on my left and one on my right, our families, our patients, and I grabbed them and I said, but when I look at you, how can we not do this? How can we not at least attempt it and move on forward to that? Again, when I see Everest, I think of the story of Dr. Sir Edmund Hillary. In his first failed attempt, and as you might know, he eventually conquered this Mount Everest. He was the first to get up there. But in his first failed attempt, he was giving a lecture at a lecture hall in London. And at one point in the lecture, with this on a slide projection screen, really huge, about 2 stories tall, behind him, he turned his back to the audience and he faced the mountain and he talked to the mountain. And he said these words, "Everest, we will conquer you because you can't get any bigger, but we can. We can. And as I meet with our families every day, you are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You are overcoming obstacles every single day. And I believe collectively, we can overcome the obstacles in our way as we work together, as we give our of ourselves, give of our finances, move forward together confidently, we can accomplish this immense task together. We have a window of opportunity to shorten drug development time and to get therapies to our patients sooner. The future of therapy development and getting drugs to our families faster is in incredibly powerful hands. Yours. Thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of this time that we have. Thank you for listening. And right now, June, if you would, if you want to.
Yes, I do. We have questions. So please, everybody, you can hit that question button and start posting any questions you have for Mark, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can by noon, or 1 o'clock, sorry. So first question we have here is, can we get more detail on how the $3.3 million per year, or the $10 million total over 3 years, will be spent?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And we will have much more detail in the fall. As a matter of fact, we do these CEO shareholder webinars is what we kind of have titled them and call them. We do them twice a year, once in the spring. I did it last spring and this spring, and then once in the fall, sometime around the end of October. I fully expect us to have that beginning to be refined. But let me just quickly say this. It's not just a stab in the dark. For instance, we asked one researcher that, do you think we can validate MRI as a surrogate biomarker? And they'd been in that. And he said, yes. And I said, what would it take to power a study big enough and strong enough and long enough with enough patients to validate this? He said, well, I think it'd take about 1.5 years. And he said, I'm pretty bad at guessing, but I think it might take $1.5 million to do that one component, that one box. And so we've gotten some ballpark estimates, or maybe citywide estimates, even bigger than a ballpark in this. And so that's why we've targeted the amount we have. Obviously, we're going to spend every nickel as prudently as possible and adjust that as we go. But tune in this fall, and I'll be able to answer that, I think, more specifically.
Okay, I have a question. How and when can patients enroll in the new Volcom program?
We're meeting with Fulcrum tomorrow, actually, or Thursday. A lot of meetings happening. Thursday, excuse me. And we've asked them to see their protocol, to see how wide or narrow, so that we can get our database prepared to help recruit and help get the word out. I don't know the date they're going to launch exactly, but we believe it's in the third quarter of the year, sometime July and on. But it's going to be 2019. So it's third to fourth quarter of this year. And we will let all of our community know.
Absolutely. Next question is, what is the process you have to provide patient data to pharmaceutical companies for clinical trials? So it intersects a bit with that question about recruiting for the Volcom trial.
Yeah, very, very good question. And thanks for letting me clarify, because the most important asset we have is our patient database, because pharmaceuticals don't have one and they can't have one. And we engage in that manner with them. We don't give that information away. We give collectively de-identified information. For instance, we have 3,400 in our patient base. We have this many that are ambulatory. We have this many in a, we can take our database and expand based on the protocol. If you have to show up once a month, we might expand out to a 2-hour drive around one of the clinical trial centers and do recruitment that way. But we always do it. We never give them any of that kind of thing. But we give them generally, here's our database, here's the power that we have to move a patient community toward a trial here or a study there.
Yeah. If I can add something there, I think for pharmaceutical companies, they actually don't want and maybe are not allowed to have direct access to a lot of patients. So there's always an organization in the middle, like the FSH Society, an advocacy organization or an academic research institution. And so it's incredibly important that every patient out there gives us their email address and their physical address so that we can effectively reach our community. It's going to be by email primarily when these trials become available. Now, obviously, everybody who is on this call, we do have your email address, and I hope we have most of your mailing addresses. But it's a really important message to get out more broadly to our community, those of you who are chapter directors or interfacing with other people. That is the reason right now that we need a way to contact every patient possible that we can reach. So sorry for interjecting.
No, that's okay. That's okay. June is really focused on that. That's her job. I mean, she's got a lot of jobs, but that's really her area of focus is acquisition and activation of our patient community in general, not just our broader community, which is patients, caregivers, family members, et cetera, but of our patients in particular.
So we have a question here, I think, of someone who wants a little more detail about the type of drug that Volcom is proposing to put into a clinical trial.
You know, from what I understand, and lots of people can answer this a lot better than I can, but it's a repurposed drug. That's good news, meaning it's been used in a lot of other clinical trials. It's got a strong safety protocol. So that eliminates about a year or two in drug development from a pharmaceutical standpoint and from our standpoint. So they can skip right to phase 2 because it's got a strong safety profile there. It's from GlaxoSmithKline. It's initial drug, and it's a DUX4 reduction or elimination. And so it targets DUX4 and the DUX4 genes. So that's really all I know about it, and I got that from the press release, as we all did. Go ahead.
It's June again. I could throw in a few additional points here. So Volcom screened, tens of thousands, probably many hundreds of thousands of chemical compounds against various what we call assays. So this is, if you think of FSHD in a test tube or in a lab dish, cells that if you sprinkle chemical on it, DUX4 stops activating and so forth. That kind of screening was carried out, and they identified quite a few compounds. I think this happens any time a company does that. Quite a few will come up as being potential therapies that can block DUX4. But then you have to do quite a lot of additional work to make sure that the compounds don't have undesired effects or that they have the right properties to be a drug. Like you don't need to take, 3 pounds a day to have an effect. You have to, all kinds of considerations going into narrowing down your lead candidate. So I want people to understand that they did every conceivable experiment they could think of short of actually putting the drug into a patient to validate to themselves that this is the best thing out there that they've been able to find.
Yeah, June, let me interject and let me add to that, and then I want to get as many questions as we can going forward. Interestingly, before they made this announcement, there was another pharmaceutical company, Ultragenyx. They're on our list. They were going after the same compound, and they have a researcher, their lead researcher on this, that had been working on it for several years. His daughter actually has FSHD, and he connected with me at the MDA conference that we just had a couple of weeks ago when this announcement came out. And he said, I'm sad professionally because it's the same drug. They did separate tests, separate validations, the same identical drug from the same company they were working on. But until one of them got the patent and then went public with it, neither of them knew it. So Ultragenics is looking at other avenues and ways. But he said, but personally, as a father of someone with FSHD, I'm excited because he independently validated the strength of this compound to really impact positively our families, independent of fulcrum. So I take some of that kind of stuff just as a layman looking in as a very, very positive result and news. That it just happened serendipitously. And yet it shows more positivity. I did get one thing I do want to mention about the ongoing pledges. We've kind of entered are coming out of what would be called a silent phase, where we talk to our board members. All of them are stepping up. Many of them are pledging 50 to 75% more than they typically give over these next 3 years. It's really amazing. One young couple that I get choked up every time I think about them and my commitment to them to make sure that we spend well and targeted money. You know, at our last talk, they called me later and said, we want to be a part of the solution. And literally they pledged 25 times what they typically give over the next 3 years. And I saw that as the amount was insignificant, more than that's a sacrifice. That wasn't just a gift. That was a sacrifice. And it humbled me. It humbled me. And so our board has done that. They said, we're behind this. If it is to be, it's up to me. And they've all taken that mantra, so to speak, very seriously, and they're moving forward too. And so we're very, very pleased with that.
So I have a few more questions. I hope we can get through them. At the March meeting with FDA, did you feel there was general agreement that this 2025 goal is realistic, that it can be met? I know it wasn't specifically discussed, but.
Yeah, it wasn't. It really wasn't specifically discussed. What we did really come to a very much agreement with everybody in the room is these are the obstacles. You've identified them well. And this is where a lot of the research is around these obstacles. And so the good news here is that there is not much that needs to be discovered. There's some, but let's say 75 to 85% of all that we need to do needs to not have already been done. Positive outcomes have already been created. It's just been created in a small subsection of patients. And so now we need to expand that and see if we can validate the small study. And which is, again, when you expand the study, you expand the dollars that it costs. You know, now it's not a $50,000 or $100,000 project. Now it's a $500,000 project, or it's a $750,000 project. But it's that validation of the small studies that show great promise. That's incredible. So I think I'm the one who believes the 2025 heart and soul, but I think a lot of our researchers have said it's doable. And that's given me.
Yeah, and I think we're sensing a lot of urgency from the companies we talk to, that they are like pushing up against that wall. They're like, we have compounds ready to take into the clinic.
Yes.
It's a big risk for us unless these things, the bridge is built. So that is, that's a kind of validation that we are on a, fast time track. We're not looking at a dim pinpoint at the end of a tunnel. It's like it's coming at us fast. Yeah. We have a question. Let's see, what role, if any, does the MDA play in our progress and funding?
On a personal level, nothing. In our space, they're beginning to activate some funding, and we so appreciate it. I wrote a letter of support to Jeff Statlin and the Clinical Trial Research Network. They applied for a 3-year infrastructure grant at about $420,000 a year for 3 years. So that's about $1.25 million. And the FDA said, we will fund the clinical trial infrastructure for the next 3 years. The one that we put in place through our startup funding and through our bridge funding. So now they're funding that infrastructure, which allows us with our dollars to come in and expand that network to 3 or 4 more sites in key areas, perhaps 5 or 6 more sites if necessary in key areas. And that literally both powers studies stronger and just through the infrastructure, as well as reduces the timelines of rolling out clinical trials. And I won't take our time to go into all the time that it takes individually, one by one, to recruit a site, to enroll a site in a clinical trial by a pharmaceutical company. But you in essence take them all in all at once, and it cuts a year perhaps off of a clinical trial development.
So let's take 2 more questions. Well, one has to do with fundraising. So with the walk and roll events, how are we able to distinguish new money from funds that would otherwise be donated anyway? So I guess the question really is it really truly expanding the funding base, or are we simply just taking from one area, the question?
We have data analysis all the time with our donor base. And so we're doing kind of both and. Sometimes it's called cannibalization. Somebody who's been given money, let's say they've been giving $1,000 over here, now leads a walk or is interested in a walk, or they have a team for a walk and they want to give their $1,000 over here. And that's perfectly fine. That's absolutely great. And well, kudos to you. If you want to pledge for this Therapeutic Accelerator, but give your money through the walk, we'll have that down. We'll have a paper with your pledge on it. We'll know the money's coming in through the walk. That's fine. The walk can celebrate growth, and yet your dollars will be allocated to FSHD Therapeutics. That's kind of the umbrella that all this.
So it's kind of related question that says, do we have established processes for making and tracking, tracking the financial commitments?
Absolutely. We have one of the world's best chief financial officers. She is amazing. And we with great integrity, allocate our resources based on how they've been given. And we spend them based on what our donors indicate that they want their dollars to go to.
And we have a dashboard that tells us how we're doing, what kind of progress we're making on every single one of the campaigns.
Yeah, in 2018, we knew that we needed to upgrade our infrastructure to accommodate this kind of initiative. And so both on our database, which then gives us corporate dashboards, executive dashboards, so that we can monitor on a daily basis our goal, our progress to goal. And we've upgraded our financial software. So, switches can be flipped and we can see different pictures in different ways. And we have dashboards in our financial programs also.
And I think the last question is from someone who says, I appreciate this presentation very much. How do patients validate if they are on the registry? I think he's talking about our contact registry and what data is in that registry. I think. Good.
June, do you want to answer that?
I will answer that question. So the easiest way to find out if you are in our contact registry is to simply email me or call our office and ask, and we'll look it up for you. If you have not received an email from us recently, or if you've not received FSHD Advocate magazine, or we try not to flood and flood your inbox, but we do maintain a steady stream of meaningful contact with our members. If you haven't gotten anything, do ask us, because it may mean that we have an outdated address or you changed your email address and we don't know. So if you haven't heard from us, again, yes, please get in touch and we'll get your information into our registry. And with that, I think we are at the end of our time, a little beyond it.
Thank you.
So,
thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. And we'll see you in about half a year with our next CEO Stakeholder Report. Goodbye.
Bye.